Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the second day of racing at the Cyclocross World Championships in Lievin. With me here to do that is Issam. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
First of all, my apologies that the podcast of yesterday only appeared on Spotify so late. There was a problem in the anchoring app which we used, which sends it out to all audio platforms. Despite pressing publish, there was an error which I didn't notice because it was quite late last night, and then I only got informed about it halfway through today's racing. So that's why that episode came out fairly late. Make sure to check it out if you want to hear anything about yesterday's racing. Today we'll be solely focusing on the men elite, women under 23 and men junior racing. Let's start with that men's elite race then. A week of hope that there could be a battle, that it wouldn't be a walkover victory for Mathieu van der Poel was quickly ended. Within the first few minutes of racing, as expected really, the six-time world champion set out on his quest to become a seven-time world champion. He said he wanted to take any hope away from all his competitors, wanted to get this over and done with, much like we've seen him race pretty much every world championship he's done. Set out fast, see how much the damage is, then reassess for the second half of the race. Just like last year, just like in Dubendorf. Honestly, like the past few world titles of him, it was really a walkover victory. He powered away, opened a 30-second gap, increased his gap a bit, got a flat, set into cruise control, maintained his gap around the minute mark, cruised in the final lap, secured his 7th world title, putting him next to Erik de Vlaming on the list of honors. 7 world titles, Issam. Van Aert recovers to second after a bad start. Nijs defies Nieuwenhuis for the bronze medal. We had this discussion last year, and I'm just going to throw it in here again. Mathieu van der Poel, the greatest cyclocross rider of all time, yes or no?
I think he is. There's not really much of a discussion at this point. It's at the moment, he's just showing that there are levels to the discipline of cyclocross, and he is just above that at the moment. He can play with his competitors in a way. He can decide what will happen in a race. He is the factor in a way, and he showed that today again. As you said, he was from the start. He was very, very much there up front, and he made sure that no one had any thoughts of trying to do anything to get in his way for a world title. And that's kind of where we were thinking this race was going to head, up until obviously that surprise participation from Van Aert and announcing that a week earlier. And as you say, that was a thing of hope. We knew that Van der Poel was going to be the one that could win this, and he had the biggest chance. But with Van Aert, doubt kind of kicked in, and there was this kind of hope of Van Aert maybe trying to make it a little bit harder and bring up a challenge. And, he's a bit far back, but he could, and who knows, on a good day. But I think it was quite clear. Obviously, circumstances didn't really help Van Aert, but I think overall, if you look at it, it was, there were levels. There were levels to this, and Van der Poel was just a little bit better than Van Aert. Van Aert had to settle for second. I think he fought very hard, was almost like a warrior. He did everything he could, but, it was just, everything was a big compromise, and I think he himself was a big compromise, and I think he kind of knew that. He gave it a shot, and I think that second place was just maximizing his day.
You say there's no debate if Van der Poel is the greatest of all time. Roger de Vlaming himself, the brother of Erik, said if Erik would line up next to Mathieu, he would win. That is a diabolical statement because the level in cyclocross has increased so much over time, like it has in pretty much any sport. This does not take anything away from the record that de Vlaming has in the sport. He's an absolute legend of the game. But if he would race in a modern day cyclocross race, I honestly doubt he would, with the level he had, make the lead lap. It's become so much quicker, so much intenser. It's uncomparable, and that's where you run into the difficulties. It's super hard to compare these riders over different generations. They raced in different times with different types of courses, different types of bikes, different types of training structures. Van der Poel is for sure the fastest cyclocross rider ever. Does that necessarily equal greatest? It depends what you value. He has all the world titles, but in recent years he hasn't done the full cyclocross seasons. That's why in terms of wins, he's never going to reach the likes of Nys and Liboton. Does that take anything away from how good he is? Absolutely not. I'm just trying to indicate that there are a number of factors here which mean that some people might have a different perception of who is the greatest rider of all time. What is for sure is that Van der Poel is the greatest rider of this era. You can make the case that, well, Van Aert, he's been there and he's kind of shifted his attention a bit from cross. What if he had not done that? Van der Poel, in a way, has also done the same. So it's tough. If you want to say greatest of all time, Issam, that's completely fine by me. I can completely see your point. And really, by the time that he retires, he can retire with 9 or 10 cyclocross world titles. And once he has that, then I really don't see that there is any way you can debate anything else, because at least I rate the world titles quite high as well. Nevertheless, as you mentioned, Van Aert with a surprise participation. I don't think that he could have hoped for much more than this. 4th row start, gets caught up at the start. I don't really want to get into this speculation, with a better start. Yes, the race could have gone differently. Van der Poel also admitted that after the second lap, he didn't even go all out anymore. And that's also, if you think about it, a ridiculous statement. There's riders like Nys, Van Aert, Nieuwenhuis going all out behind him. And he said he was just riding on control to avoid breaking the bike, avoiding risks, to avoid punctures. Van Aert did what he could, and this is what he came here for. He wanted to race here because he knew he could get a medal, and he got that medal. The course was maybe not perfect, but it was all right for him. And then in second place is what we both expected would happen.
He kind of put himself in that position. It's if he wanted to be, a bit much further ahead in the starting list, and he wanted to be up there at the start, then you had to do a little bit more racing. Same with his technique. If he wanted to have a better race, because today, it looked awful at times. We know that is something that you can work on quite easily, but he didn't really put that work in. And so a lot of things were compromised going into this race. It was basically, I think the form in which he is in currently is quite good. And I think that is also something that you kind of see Visma is holding on to, in the sense of going towards the road season and what he wants to do there. But today it was just, he never really he didn't have enough to try and challenge Van der Poel. I think that even if he was a bit further up, he would have been maybe around for a lap or two, and then it would have been over. And even that would have been a hard challenge. And I think that is just, you can look at it from two ways. You can look at it and say he kind of failed in trying to bring a challenge to Van der Poel. Why did he even bother? And on the other hand, you can also look at it and say, well, but he was, with that compromised preparation, he was still able to be second and still be able to be somewhat in a very secure second place. It was not really a challenge in the end. And I think that probably the second way of looking at it is probably the best, and is also the most honest, because I think that in the end you should just look at it and be like, he didn't really have a fair preparation, and that's all up to him. He made that decision to go about cyclocross the way he did. He can draw his lessons from this and know that if he wants to beat Van der Poel, if he wants to become a world champion again, more work has to be put in, and then something is possible. But if he doesn't do that, he's not going to be able to beat Van der Poel in the next coming years.
I think Van Aert knows that. Compare this season and also last season to how he approached that Hoogerheide World Championship season. At the start of that season, he announced, I'm racing the Worlds, I want to do well, I want to compete for the world title. We were both a bit in doubt because we'd heard that story before, but then he'd been outclassed by Van der Poel. But he did really go for it, more so than he had done in earlier seasons. He went for it, he was able to deliver the fight, and it came down to a sprint there, right? That's the closest he's been in a very long time over the course of a season to being better than Van der Poel. In fact, on head-to-head, he was better. I would tend to say that I look at his performance in the second scenario you presented to me. This is a second place despite his preparation, despite having a faulty technique, despite not doing the cross-specific training. I don't really get why. Well, I do get it. It's reactionary. Van Aert's team says he's not doing extra training for the Cyclocross Worlds. He's preparing his road season. Then Van Aert does 3 trainings in a day, and the story is, oh, he's doing extra training for Worlds. He never really prepared for this race in that sense. He didn't do any laps earlier on the course. He showed up today like for every other race. He did his media duties, which took some energy out of him. It's an hour-long effort. Tomorrow is a travel day for him. It's going to marginally impact his preparation for the road season. But I'm quite confident he came here knowing that this was what he wanted to do. Finish on the podium. Second place is what he had his eyes on. He was not disappointed after the race. He knew that this was probably going to happen, but he wanted to be there in case something happened to Van der Poel. Van der Poel was better. Technically, he was more explosive, and that's fine. Van der Poel could have had something go wrong. There were quite a lot of punctures today. The reason for that it's more than yesterday, my theory is the following. The course froze quite hard overnight, where yesterday the course completely melted. Today there were several sections where it didn't melt over the course of the day. Those frozen parts are quite sharp. It's easy to flat there. But what had they done? They'd covered the deepest ruts with mud yesterday, and that meant that it became a bit of a free-for-all. It was risky. You could puncture everywhere. Everybody could take every line again. The course was restored to the way it was on the Thursday pre-ride. Yesterday, everybody knew which ruts to avoid, which had the rocks. They knew which ones to take, which were clean. That wasn't there anymore. So I feel that that's where the punctures came from. Van der Poel said he was worried he would flat, that it would cost him the race, that he was saving energy in case that would happen. He had one flat. Riders like Toon Aerts had multiple flats. That was in the end a bit unfortunate, but luckily in the grand scheme of things it wasn't nearly as bad as that World Championship in PLS.
Yeah, thankfully it played maybe a role for the ones a bit further behind, but I think up front it was alright. As you said, Van der Poel had a puncture, but in the end it didn't really hamper his race all too much. We had Van der Poel in first and Van Aert in second, and I think that was not the biggest surprise of the day. And after that, all eyes were probably on who was going to finish in third. And we mentioned some names. Nys was one that we mentioned, although his last weekend wasn't the greatest. But there he was, and it was nice to see that he was able to bounce back from that weekend, and he was able to show the form that he somewhat had also the weeks before. It was interesting to see, and it was also, in a way, somewhat of a surprise because it's difficult from such a weekend to come back from that and show yourself up front. But he was able to do so, and he had a great battle with Nieuwenhuis. But in the end, I think that Nieuwenhuis, he looked very good in the beginning, and it almost looked like that third place was going to be his. But Nys was able to, just get through that last part of the race better than Nieuwenhuis did. And Nieuwenhuis just didn't really have an answer for Nys, and it was great to see that Nys was able on the podium. So, yeah, behind those two, it was definitely an interesting battle for third. And somewhat what you expected, because it was a hard race. It was difficult for the others to really have a tactical race. It was more of a, the strongest gets it, and behind it's just the battle of trying to get through the race as fast as possible. There was not really much tactics going on, I felt like, and it was great to see that Nys bounced back and got that podium.
The podium of Nys is perhaps a bit telling for how reactionary he can be sometimes. Last week he was saying, oh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't race the Worlds. At least that was the rumors that were in the Belgian papers. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not going to go for 7th place. One bad race right after a bit of illness. Was this the Van Tornhout illness in the end? Was it really something? Was it to take the pressure off? We'll never know. I doubt it myself. I think he just didn't feel good last week. Now got it together. He was in a quite long battle with his former teammate, Joris Nieuwenhuis. The course was probably the hardest it was all weekend. it was really, really chewed up. There was no traction. Some of these climbs, for instance, where you could see it really good was the long one after the first set of stairs. Yesterday, some women elite were able to ride it. Today, the men elite couldn't make it. I saw one Swiss guy all the way at the back of the race make it up there, which was surprising, but Van der Poel was running it. It was pretty much a run. That's definitely something that got worse throughout the weekend. Really, really, really fighting for traction everywhere. It became, in the end, a course for the powerhouses. If you look at the first 8 riders in the race, those are the powerhouses, the big engines. It's Van der Poel, Van Aert, Nys, Nieuwenhuis, Verstringen, Aerts, Van Toerenhout, Wieseuren, and then Van der Haar and Zweek. These are the riders who we've talked about hope for these conditions. When it's time to load up the raw watts, they come into their element. The course had a few technical elements, but by the time this race was going, not that much. That didn't make the difference. Nieuwenhuis and Nys were together. Nieuwenhuis tried to seize the opportunity early in the race when Van Aert was behind a bit. Didn't work out. Van Aert secured that place relatively easy. But in the end, I think Nys just had more watts than Nieuwenhuis. And he should be happy. How do you think that he reflects on this season, Issam? It's been a season with a lot of ups and downs. It's his first official season as an elite. Of course, last year he raced as elite when he was still a U23. How do you think he reflects on this?
Hard to say. I don't think he's going to be all too hard on himself and say that it was a successful season, and that's how I look at it as well. I think that he kind of ticked off the things that he wanted to achieve this season. And I think that is definitely, that is something that is very difficult to do. But on command, be good on the races that you really want to be good at. He wanted to show himself in the races, which he did. He got that European title. He got the Belgian national title and a podium on the World Championships, which is basically best of the rest. So I think he can be satisfied with this season. And sure, he will look at this season and say, I need to win more. And that is understandable. I can definitely see that if he makes that point. But he should be happy with this. And he should look at this and be like, this is a very good step for the next coming years. And he will grow in that as well. As you said, he's someone that maybe overreacts at times, certain situations or things going on, and that's natural in a way. You know, he's still at an age in which that is that can happen. And I think with experience and over time, it will get better and better, and he will grow more and more in his role as one of the better cyclocross riders that we have. And I think also the road will play a very important role in that development. I think that will only help him. It will not hurt him that much. We will see maybe a more compromised season, but it is great to see that he has developed to the potential that we somewhat saw in the junior categories, but it's very hard to reach that, and I think that he can say that it is a success currently.
He is going to, at some point, cut back in his cross program, but he said that in the upcoming few years, cross is still too important for him. He has some big goals there which he wants to achieve. I imagine a world title is one of them. Probably winning the overall World Cup is another. It's been a season with ups and downs. And honestly, for the most riders that did the full season, it's been one like that. Nieuwenhuis had a very long down, the shingles infection, only did 5 races so far. Verstringen had that long injury which kept him off the bike. Then had his flying return in Namur. Also had a few downs in Zonhoven, in Besançon. Also, the Belgian Championships were a bit of a disappointment for him personally. It's hard. It's been a season where the level behind Van der Poel and Van Aert has been extremely high. It's been extremely competitive. And I've said this before. Van Toerenhout had a bad first part of the season, recovered well with a good second part. Didn't deliver at the championships this year. Van der Haar had a good start, had a bad middle part, looked on the up again, also didn't perform here. He should have done a bit better also in these course conditions. I think he should have been able to finish at least 7th here. But yeah, it was competitive there. The course conditions didn't suit him. And then you kind of end up here. It kind of fell in its place. I wish I had more to say, but with the nature of this course, everybody kind of fell where they belong. Aerts had 3 flat tires, could have maybe been in the mix for the bronze medal without them. Probably would have been, to be fair, if you look at that. And then for the rest, yeah, Sveik blew up. I don't know if you had any other takeaways.
No, not really. I think that it kind of fell in its place, and for the broadcast, this was somewhat difficult to make something out of it because a lot of the airtime went to Van Aert, Nys, and Nieuwenhuis, and we saw a glimpse of the guys behind and a glimpse of Van der Poel at times, but the focus was mainly on those 3. It was a bit of a shame that Oorts was not able to get a top 10, I think. That was a shame. Other than that, I think that a lot of riders, Iserbyt was not able to get it around, and I think that if you look at his season, it's a bit typical. Good races, some bad races, and it's not the greatest of seasons for Iserbyt, despite the fact that he was up there at times and he was, he had been doing well. But I think that this is just, this is what it is, and it's not going to be better. And maybe in the last couple of races he can pick one and make something out of that. But yeah, it's not the greatest of seasons for him. I think if you look at it from these type of races where you expect him to be up there, big occasions, and he's not really able to show it, which is a bit of a shame for him. But yeah, no, other than that, it fell somewhat in his place, and I'm sure that there are going to be some riders that had their story, their untold story in a way with the punctures and that, but overall, yeah, nothing really much to add.
Maybe a few disappointments. Iserbyt, Van de Putte, 13 and 14. Both riders had hoped for more. For Iserbyt, you can definitely make the case that these course conditions didn't suit him. He was, however, still disappointed, and he should be with the 13th place. Van de Putte has been sick. He also raced really, really a lot of races this season, which undeniably has influenced his fitness at this back end of the season. The French were hoping to get a top 10, but they took themselves out of contention in the first corner. 3 of them hit the ground. Venturini was involved together with Joshua Dubois and David Menu. That were their hopes gone. Venturini fought back up, but paid the price for moving through pretty much the entire field in the first lap. Kevin Kuhn, Cameron Mason, their season is kind of reflected by these results. Both of them have had a few good moments, but it's not been as good as we have seen them do before. More so for Mason than for Kuhn. And those are pretty much the takes on this race. If we look at the other races there were, the women's U23 race, Issam, that was also as predicted. In the preview, we drew it up into 2 categories. The 3 races with clear favorites. Men elite, men under 23, women under 23. All 3 were won in dominant fashion. Backstedt was the only one out of the favorites who didn't break away in the first lap. She took a tumble, regained the lead, opened the gap, defended a 10-15 second margin on Schreiber. As soon as Schreiber decided to put a big push in to try and close the gap, she made a mistake on the off-camber after the first pit. That was the race over for her. She finished second, which is her first medal at the World Championships. It's the first medal for Luxembourg since 1985 when the World Championships were in Munich, and third place went to Bentveld. No real surprise with Backstedt taking the win. Schreiber finishing second is in line with the season. Nevertheless, we've seen her have struggles at World Championships before, so for her it's good that things finally chained together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Schreiber, it almost went wrong at the start, with just clicking out of the pedal and not getting it going there, and she recovered from that well, and it was a weird race in a way, from Schreiber, because she was able to then really get closer to Backstedt, and I don't know if that was really because Backstedt was also, I wouldn't say taking it easy, but maybe kind of dropping the pace a little bit. But then, as you say, Schreiber was then making mistakes, and he could not really make use of the effort made, because she was closing in and then loses time with silly mistakes, and that was a bit of a shame. I think that Schreiber had a good day today, but it was just not really. It had to be a bit better to really bring up that fight to Backstedt. But as you say, it's a medal. It's a first medal for Schreiber, so she can be very happy with that. And Backstedt was able to fulfill her role as the main favorite, and it was, in some ways, it wasn't really surprising that she was able to pull that off. And it's going to be interesting to see what she's going to do next year in terms of World Championships, and also in general. I think that there is still some work that Backstedt can put in terms of cyclocross. The technique wasn't all too great, as you said. The first lap was not great. The mistakes there, the crash, that hampers you in a way because she has the talent and she's very good. But those are just things that she has to improve on a little bit, and she knows it. But progress has to be made in that regard.
There's definitely still margin for growth in Backstedt, and most of that is indeed in the technical abilities. I do wonder what trajectory her road career will take. Last year she had a very good outing in Paris-Roubaix. She was up there, finishing 16th in the end. That seems like the perfect race for her. She does not climb well. I'm curious to see what approach they will take at Canyon SRAM with her. Will they play her more as a sprinter? Will they keep trying these spring classics, which also involve climbing? Have they kind of shifted away from that idea? And are they going to turn her into a time trialist or not? She won the prologue of the Ladies Tour, the CMAC Ladies Tour at the end of the year. That's something I will keep in mind. She indicated that next year she plans on racing the U23 race again in Hulst. First of all, Hulst is not a good course for her. It's probably too technical for her. Nevertheless, I think the comment is useless because if she does extremely well next year, let's say she has a good road season, then comes into cross and chains together a number of victories, then she could obviously decide to do that differently. So for now, I don't attach too much value to those comments. It was a good outing by her today. Schreiber gave her a good run for her money, and that's a rider who's really improved quite a bit over the years. These conditions here today when they were racing were more treacherous than when the Men Elite raced. They raced on the frozen underlayer, a molten top layer, which was super slippery. That's the same conditions as I talked about in the Besançon podcast for the juniors. The juniors here today also raced in those conditions, but when the Women U23 raced, they were at their hardest. There were quite a lot of mistakes, quite a lot of crashes. Backstedt had her moment, Schreiber had her moment. I didn't really see Benveld have any of those moments. Her third place can't be classified as a huge surprise, Issam, over this season. She has been that third rider most of the time, but we indicated in our preview that in recent weeks a few other riders were able to seriously challenge her. Isabella Holmgren had gotten the upper hand over her a couple of times. We'd seen Gladanova do it, but then race day, the conditions were Bentveld conditions. She got it together, and with that slippery layer, that really hurt Holmgren especially. I didn't think Géry had the power. For Holmgren, it was definitely feeling comfortable enough in these conditions. In Hulst, she was definitely uncomfortable in the downhills with the challenging sections, and today the same was visible. Of course, it becomes a bit less of a problem when the drops are not as big as in Hulst, but still there was plenty of places on this course where Holmgren just didn't feel comfortable enough, which hurt her in the end.
For Bentveld, we kind of knew that if she would get it together, that third place was definitely something she could, she could achieve. And I think she raced a bit smarter than Géry as well. I think that Géry was maybe going a little bit too much ahead of herself at the first half of the race, and I think she paid the price for that in the second half. And I felt that Bentveld was a bit more calculated and okay, if I pace myself well, that third place is almost a certainty. And in a way, it's good to see that she was able to get that podium spot. I think for her development, it's definitely not a bad thing to have these results. Although, if you look at her season overall, it wasn't spectacular. I think that, these are just kind of the results that help you continue with that journey towards the top. And I think that is also important. It's not always going to be a great season. This season wasn't the greatest, and we will see what the next couple of years will bring for Bentveld. And that is also part of cyclocross. It's the development as well that plays a role, and we will see how that goes. And I think in the end, you can look at this race and say that it kind of fell in its place quite well. It was a bit, for certain riders, I think the conditions were not the greatest. I think for Holmgren as well. And yeah, that's sometimes how it goes. Huh?
Let's look at the entire top 10 then. The podium was Backstedt, Schreiber, Bentveld. Fourth place went to Celia Géry ahead of Isabella Holmgren and Victoria Gladenova. Seventh place was for Amandine Muller ahead of Ella McLean-Howell. Imogen Wolf ninth with Simona Spesna rounding out the top 10. A few thoughts here, Issam. First, let's look at something that's worth mentioning here. The fact that there's 4 first-year U23s finishing in the top 10. Géry 4th, Gladenova 6th, Muller 7th, Wolf 9th. Just outside of the top 10, long in the fight for that 10th position were Kat Ferguson and Vida Lopez de San Roman. It's a very strong generation of first-year U23s. For now, Backstedt, Schreiber and Bentveld remain out of reach. Schreiber is graduating out. Zemanova wasn't here, remains a top-tier talent. Let's hope she can recover from the long COVID. It's a strong generation of U23s in general. Many of these riders here in the top 10, in fact, if we look just at the full top 10, even at the top 15, if these riders would have been in the elite race, we would have been talking about many of these riders as contenders for the top 10 and certainly top 20. It generally feels that from the top 20 of the World Cups we've seen, 10 riders raced the women's elite race and 10 riders raced the women's under 23 race. It's very strong in general, and the results of the first years reflect that. Géry leading the charge, but we've also seen Gladenova do it at points this season. We know just how talented Wolf and Ferguson are, not for the least on the road. And Muller is a rider who last year was not really on the level of these riders, but who has made some serious progress. And that's also something worth mentioning, that the AS Bike team seems settled. They have 4 major French talents on their team.
Yeah, their recruiting has been going well. But yeah, it's true. I think on the women's side, it's more notable and it happens a little bit more currently. That's just a very positive thing. I think it shows in a way that it's a category which is in development more. The growth is, I think, a little bit larger there. You see it every year that the women elites level just gets better and better. And I think that is also visible in the talent that is coming through. And most of these names are also, multidisciplinary. They have their focus as well, their eyes on the road or mountain bike. And that is positive. I think that's very positive. And it was good to see. I think Gladenova was definitely someone that I expected maybe a bit closer towards both Holmgren and Géry. But I think that still sticks. Is definitely something she can be very happy with. And, the same goes for Muller, which was, for me, if I look at that top 10, maybe one of the surprises that I didn't expect to be up there, but also is making some good ground and is developing quite well. And as you say, AS Bikes have done their recruiting. They have that in order, and they are doing it very well. And I think the question is really going to be, because you were saying, it feels like we're having almost like 10 of the top 20 doing the under 23 race. The question is really, are they going to be able to stick around cyclocross in the next couple of years? Because there is definitely, the talent is there. The nationalities are not Dutch, and that is also, I guess, a positive one. But the question really is, are they going to be able to stick around and also make it difficult for currently the domination that there's somewhat is apparent there in the women elites field? Are they going to be able to make it difficult for those to get themselves in top 5s and top 10s and really break that sort of domination which is going on in the top 10 of the women elite category?
That's a question we can talk about a bit more in our overarching thoughts towards the end of this podcast. Before, I want to point out 2 further things. The Brits had a very strong showing here in this race. Backstedt 1, McLean-Howell 8, Wolf 9, Ferguson 13. McLean-Howell rode a really good race. I was quite impressed with how composed her ride was. Yes, she lacked some technical abilities, but she didn't hit the deck. She is a rider who's very good on the mountain bike, finished on the podium, I believe, in second place of the U23 World Championships this year, behind Isabella Holmgren. She did decent in these Christmas cross races. Then, after Baal only raced the Nationals, which was a DNF, decided to race the World Championships. I think it's very nice to see that she's returned to cyclocross a bit more after she didn't do that last year. She's a rider who finished 4th at the Fayetteville World Championships. And now I'm going to say it anyway. This is a positive. Riders like this need to be retained for the sport in order for it to become more international. So it's a positive that this season she decided to race for the Heizomat team and has done quite well. As said, Ferguson had a puncture. Wolf moved forward a bit throughout the race. It was tricky. There were lots of mistakes and crashes in the background of the broadcast, which were visible along the course. And in all of that, Simona Spesna rode a really strong and impressive ride. This is not a rider who I had expected in the top 10. I looked at her results. Last year she was 12th at the World Championships, which was then also a surprising result. She hadn't shown much in really any of the races she'd done, but she can get it together really well for these type of races. Her final laps compared to the riders around her were quite fast. She was bummed that she had a middle lap that wasn't good. I think she had a flat. She was really disappointed, in tears after the race. Nevertheless, a good and impressive result, beating a couple of good riders. As said, this field here runs quite deep, and it was also considerably larger than it was in the past few years. If we shift our attention to the men junior race, we came in here with a lot of question marks. Throughout the season, several riders had done well, then they didn't do well. Last week, Benedict Benz won in Hogerheide despite not getting a single top 10 in a World Cup this season. Today, at least for the front two positions, the order of the season was respected. The race turned into a battle between Søren Brouillard-Jumar and Mattia Agostinaccio, but not after a lot of drama. Oscar Amy was up there early in the race. He crashed a number of times. Benjamin Noel Suarez took the lead at some point after Jumar and Agostinaccio made a couple of mistakes. He then himself made a mistake. Jumar went into the final lap with a 10-second lead, but then Agostinaccio, who had a crash in the penultimate lap, really got under steam. He started kicking into gear on the road climb. Much like his win in Zonhoven, he put in a blistering final lap. His final lap was nearly as quick as his first lap, despite the course having deteriorated significantly. He didn't go into the pits when Jumar did. He caught up to the French first-year junior, dropped him, made no mistakes, and won the world title. Second year in a row that Italy wins the men U23 world title. I've said it a couple of times already, and I will say it a final time now. Agostinaccio and Vietzi show a lot of similarities. They haven't shown much as a first-year junior. They progress greatly over the summer and are all of a sudden favorites, and both win the world title in the end. Jumar finished in a solid second place. He is a first year. First year should always be happy if they finish in the top 5, let alone on the podium. Grigolini finished third. That Italian rider moved through the field quite nice after a bad start. Issam, what are your takes on the Italian-French dominance in the junior category?
Well, I'm just quite happy that the names that we somewhat expected to be up front are up front, because otherwise it was going to be a difficult take that I had to give on this race. But I would say the riders from both Italy and France showed up today. At least Søren was definitely able to really fulfill his place as probably one of the bigger favorites, and Agostinaccio was at times not really clean in his racing, I would say, making a lot of mistakes and making it very difficult for himself. But my God, that last lap from Agostinaccio was insane. And I have to say, Grigolini is somewhat one of those riders that I did not have on my radar, and it's just one of those riders that Italy has at the moment. I think, the Patrick Pezzo Rossola was also up there at a certain point, and the Italians have great talent, and it's great to see that they are able to have them at the moment in the men junior category. It's definitely going to be the question: are they going to be able to keep those riders within cyclocross. I mean, it's great to see that Fietzi, after winning the men junior category, is still within cyclocross, is doing very well. So in that regard, we have an example of where that could result into the riders staying in cyclocross. But it's great to see, and I think the racing itself was also very good. It was, as you expect from a men junior race, very hectic. It was crazy at times. Everyone had their mistakes. Everyone had their problems. It was at times, Noval Suarez was looking to make it happen and take the victory, and Agostinacio looked in a position where I was thinking, "Whoa, this is going to be difficult." Bruyère had his moments, so it was great to see. It was a great race, and it was a race where you cannot really make a lot of sense out. We will try to, but it was very entertaining, and it was once again a pleasure to see all these riders that we somewhat expected to be up there.
The race was chaos. Every time the announcer would come on, there would be chute, problème mécanique. It was one after the other. Hofer, who started really well, suffered a crash off camera and broke his nose. Really unfortunate for him. This is probably the last time we'll have seen him in action in a cyclocross race. He is on the Bahrain track, and he is a very powerful rider. Probably going to be the end of his cyclocross campaign, which is a really unfortunate way to end it because he had started super well. Then later, Oscar Amy had his issues. He came together with Jumar. Jumar fell further back. Everybody made the mistakes, but it of course stings if you're Noval Suarez, who puts together a good first couple of laps, but then piles up the mistakes towards the end when the tiredness, when the fatigue sets in. That's more painful than if you perhaps make the mistake early on and are out of contention, because then the feeling of, hey, this medal really slipped through my fingers, that's then less. That doesn't change the fact that from the riders in the top 10, almost everybody had something go wrong for them, a mechanical, a crash. Really, by just being consistent, by being smooth, avoiding those mistakes, you could finish quite high. Grigolini is the example of that. You said that he wasn't really on your radar. I can get that. I did mention him, especially also in the write-up ahead of the race. He was good in Benidorm, where he finished 6th. He'd been on the bubble of the top 10 in Hulst and Zonhoven. In Hoogrijden, he was up there until he crashed on the barriers. 3rd place is still an overperformance here, but it was somewhat coming. The Italians with Pontoni have been doing great work. They're going to have a few nice riders next year. I won't be able to draw the parallel with Agostinacchio because Grigolini and Pezzorosola have shown good things as a first year. And if you want to talk about why Agostinacchio won this race, I said it before, his final lap was crazy. The way he rode up that climb, the way he stormed by pit 1 where I was watching, that was fantastic. It was breathtaking. He was going at it with real Italian fighting spirit. It really reminded me of that win in Zonhoven. There, Noval Suarez was the rider up ahead. He looked to be secure of the win. Agostinacchio started chasing really hard. Then Noval Suarez felt the pressure, made a mistake, and Agostinacchio won. Here, Jumar didn't make the mistake. He finished 2nd in the end on merit. They both made a number of mistakes. If anything, Agostinacchio made a few more. But Jumar shouldn't be disappointed with this. Of course, the initial disappointment makes sense, but as a first year to finish 2nd, not mention that Grigolini and Noval are also first years, all of them should be super satisfied. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Mattia Agostinacchio took the win ahead of Søren Bruyère-Jumar, with Filippo Grigolini completing the podium. 2 Italians and a French rider on there. Benjamin Noval Suarez finished 4th ahead of Mats van den Einde and Oscar Amy. Soen Le Pan finished 7th ahead of Michiel Maurits. Florian Ferry was 9th with Milo Wills completing the top 10. Issam, I knew you wanted to say something about Van den Einde and Amy, both riders who really had even more misfortune than the other riders.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe start with Oscar Amy. I think that was he was in he didn't really want to be in the way of the others, but he was there when something happened. He was there, and he had his issues with Agostinaccio. It was tricky for him, I think, and that really set him off, because I felt that he had the legs to be up there for a fight for a podium. I don't know if that podium was possible in the end, but I think that because of the circumstances that he had to endure, and he was always kind of on the wrong end of the incidents, I guess, and I think that really hurt him, and that hurt his race, and it was a shame to see, because he had the legs. It looked really good. He can be happy with I think that first half and the way he was racing, and just try to bounce back from this, and that's obviously a bit bitter, and you cannot really gain anything from that, but that's sometimes how it goes, and that's somewhat the nature of a men junior race, just so hectic at times, and it was a shame to see. And for Van der Nijn, it was in my eyes somewhat the guy that I thought was going to be a favorite for a podium. And I think that today he showed that the potential was there, but it doesn't really help if you have a bad start. And I think also during the race he had an issue with his chain. Those are just things that don't really help. I think that he crashed as well, and he also had to endure quite a lot. And I think that if it wasn't for that, he definitely looked to be up there, because someone that maybe we go over as well was Lejeune, who was there at the first half of the race, and then something happened to him in the last lap. I think it was a crash, but he fell completely out of that top 5. But Van der Nijn at a certain point was very close to, making that connection with Lejeune. And then he had that issue with the chain, which kind of put him out of rhythm. He had to get back again, and he came close in that final lap, but it was just not really enough for him to bring up that fight to Grigolini for 3rd or Noval for 4th, and he had to settle for 5th. And I think that he is also going to be disappointed, but can look back on the race in which he really fought his heart out, and he was definitely strong and had the legs to be on the podium.
Lejeune was punching above his weight in terms of power. His power is lacking, but he has phenomenal technical abilities. It really makes me wonder if he is perhaps, and I'm not sure, because Jumar is also still a somewhat small rider, and Noval, despite having quite a bit of power, is also small. These riders can mature. Lejeune, it just feels different. His technical abilities are really, really solid. The way he flew through the Kuil in Zonhoven this year, or delivered a masterclass in Hulst where he won, those were special rides by him. Today, though, those technical skills helped him stay in contention for the podium. It's a shame that those skills abandoned him in the final lap, that he didn't really get to fight for it. Time for some overarching thoughts over the weekend, some general thoughts, Issam. If we look at it, maybe starting on the men's side, what can we conclude? In the junior category, we see a continuation of the renaissance of the Italian and French junior programs that were notorious in the early 2000s. For the French, it lasted until the 2010s, where they really delivered strong junior generations. It dipped out for a while. The Brits kind of took over that place. While the Brits are still producing solid amount of talent with Amy and Wills, they have 2 men junior in the top 10. Pitcock, of course, is a rider who's graduated from their program. We see that the French, post-COVID, have turned it around, starting with that world title for BCO. With Jumar, they have another rider in the mix here. The Italians go back-to-back here. Vietzi was the first world champion since Malacarne in 2005. They immediately double up with Agostinaccio here. Those are really good results. The men junior category is fairly international. Lots of different nationalities in the top 20. The question, however, remains, are these riders going to stay in the sport? Because if we look at the men U23, yes, there are positive signs. Vietzi, Sparvel, Simon. We've seen just outside of the top 10, Romein, Takac, to an extent Sole. But the Belgians still, through a combination of nurture, their riders get signed to the teams where they receive a lot of dedicated care, and also the fact that a lot of high-profile races are near to them, develop more. Seppe van den Boer and Kai de Bruikere have really developed a lot since they've been juniors. And if you then look at the elite category, it's a negative record in a way, with Orts being the first non-Dutch Belgian finishing 12th. So the further up we go, the less international it gets. And it's been that case for a while now.
Yeah, it has, and it's if you look at the men under 23 category and you look at the riders there, it's the most of the riders that are there in that top 10. I think apart from Jules Simon from AS Bikes and Sparvel for Decathlon AG Désert, I think the others are the others, and BCO as well. The others are all associated with either Paul Sauze, Baloise, Alpecin, or that Roodhoofd family, and I think that. We have discussed that already. It's just, I think that those are currently the teams that you need to bridge that gap from junior into the under 23, and then from there you can grow and become a very reasonable men elite rider. That is just the way it is at the moment, and it's hard for that to change. I think that it is good to see that the French Federation puts in the hours. Same goes for the Italian, and they are trying. But it's never really going to be as successful as those teams at the moment. Is that something that should be looked at? For sure. But how are you going to tackle that? I don't know. It's difficult. And it's maybe bigger than only this issue. It's maybe an issue that is more related to the sport itself. And yeah, that's a bit of a shame. And I think that if you look at the men category, at least, if you look at the results, I think that in most cases we got riders on the podium that we somewhat expected. I think that the Bruikere definitely overperformed, but if you look on the men's side in the men elite, that those were the riders that we could expect on the podium, and the same goes for Del Grosso and Michels, despite Michels having his difficult season. And in the men junior, I think with Agostinaccio and Jumar, those were the two that we really expected to be on the podium. And Grigolini, for you, less of a surprise, for me a bit more, and it was a World Championships on the course which was honest, I think, and that is a good thing. I'm quite happy with that, because you never really know what a course could bring, and it could always be a bit surprising. But thankfully, it wasn't really the case, and it gave a very honest opportunity for all the competitors in a way, and that is a positive.
It's the second year in a row that the World Championships go without a major upset. Certainly not for the wins. Grigolini is, of course, still somewhat of a surprise that he finishes on the podium. We can consider it a surprise, probably the most surprising podium finisher of the weekend. My point was more that he had been spiked on my radar by what I saw from him in Benidorm, and also the fact that he was in that lead group in Hoogheide for at least half of the race. I'm not entirely sure when he crashed. But yeah, back to your point, Issam, it's a problem of the sport. The international appeal from it has collapsed since mountain bike became Olympic, since the golden age or second golden age of Belgian cyclocross, with the likes of Nijs, Wellens, Vervecke, Albert, really shifting the center of the sport completely to Belgium, making the advantages for the Belgians numerous and very strong. There's just little prestige and little money in the sport for riders to keep doing this outside. Scott Funston in the mix zone was telling that there's a 90% chance he's retiring. He is one of the best American riders. He finishes 19th here. He works a 30-hour job. He trains 12 hours. In a good week, he trains 16 to 18 hours. He's fighting here against riders who have this as their full-time job. He beats Ron Haar. Okay, he has a bad season and crashed and messed up his kneecap, but he also beat a rider like Hendricks. He's fighting riders like Venturini and Thomas Main. That's the tough reality of the sport if you're not Dutch or Belgian, if you're not on one of those teams, as you say. I really hope that Vietzi can go on to do good things, because he's picked up by Alpecin. I hope this Italian sponsor link, as they also picked up Casasola, will do something for Italian cyclocross. But in France, their national coach talks a lot about we need to avoid that this generation waits the same destiny as the young riders we've had before. In the past, we had these talents like Benoit, and they made the mistakes, or Venturini, he went to a road team, didn't develop his cross skills, completely dropped out of cross, came back and was too rusty. That's something that needs to happen, and I really hope that that can happen, because France and Italy are at the moment two of the most promising programs. Sparfell, I'm not going to be too harsh on him for missing the podium here. That can happen. Bisio had a bad season. That can happen. But realistically, what we want to see next year is that they make steps, that they improve their technical abilities, that they improve their form, that their power improves, that they can consistently fight. That next year it's not the Breukeren or Haverdings who wins the world title, but perhaps it's the slightly younger Vietzi who wins the world title, or it's Aubin Sparfell, or who knows what Agostinacchio can do when he moves to that category. Another thing when we're talking about these programs, Issam, and it's not at the same scale or the same magnitude, partly because they don't have the same amounts of resources available to them, is the Czech program. Bazant this year didn't materialize. He finished on the podium last year as a first year, but he had a lot of illnesses this year. Nevertheless, their program is also putting out the talents. Bukovska on the junior women's side. As said, Spesna surprising 10th place in the women's under 23 race. But with Gorova, they had a second rider in the top 10 of yesterday's junior women's race. That talent program, or that pool of talent there, is slowly but surely growing. They're pushing the riders through, and that's another positive. Of course, in the women's under 23, the field is also quite international, and hopefully, I've said it, I think, to you before, we can count on Backstedt and Schreiber doing this sport. Hopefully, we can keep counting on riders like Géry and Ferguson and Wolf to also make progress and put their foot in between the door in the elite field, because there it's at the moment still somewhat Dutch dominated, but it's also less Dutch dominated than a few years ago when there were 10 Dutch riders that could just fill the top 10 of a World Cup. That's slowly but surely improving there, partly because I feel teams are more open to letting their road riders continue doing cross.
Yeah, I think that on the women's side, it's the perspective is arguably a little bit better, and it's good to see that the road teams are also enabling the riders to keep cyclocross within their program, despite the fact that they also want to do well on the road. And I think that in a way that is probably, if you look at how that is working currently, I think that is the way forward in a way. I think especially if you are a road rider, you basically have to be in a road team that also allows you to be within cyclocross, and also maybe gives you the attention that you need. It doesn't really need to be someone within the team. You can also hire someone outside of the team, but at least with the knowledge for you to be doing well in cyclocross and helping you out in with the training and just the technical things of it. And I think it looks to be probably next to these big cyclocross kind of teams. That probably looks to be the successful way forward. At least on the women's side, it looks to be working. And yeah, it's hopeful. It's hopeful, and we shouldn't be too pessimistic. But I think that it's just at times you look at it and you'll be like, meh. It can be a little bit better, and I think it will be better. But it's just really, patience is maybe something that we also should have in a way.
If anything, I'm too optimistic about these Italian and French riders really sticking around, without getting too much into the whole development discussion, which we can probably dedicate a podcast to in the off season. If you're wondering for the World Cup schedule, that we'll record our pessimistic view of that later this week. But two more points I want to make. First, the North American cyclocross. They are pushing through a couple of talents in recent years. Carrier finished on the podium here. For me, that's on a personal note a W. When Holmgren went 1-2 in Hogerheide, I said that there was some talent coming through and I tipped Carrier there. So I was, in that sense, pleased to see one of my takes for once age very well over the long term. That's a Canadian success. The Americans had some talent in the junior women's category with Cusack and Sarkisov doing quite well, both good riders on the road as well. So it will be interesting to see if that scene can move back to where it was. Honestly, the ride by Klaus was not bad at all. This is pretty much the best she could have hoped for. So let's hope that as that talent moves through, that's one of the other regions we can focus on. In another positive there, Anja Grossmann for Switzerland. Finally, the Swiss are bringing women back to cyclocross races at the World Championships, at the World Cups. It's long overdue. For years, they didn't have the talent, also not the will by the federation, I've been told. But yeah, that was good. She was really, really upset that she couldn't compete for the world title, that she missed out on the podium. She wants to give it her everything next year. I respect that. Hulst should honestly be a better course for her. And then finally, Issam, Belgium, second year in a row that they win no gold medals. This year, it came as less of a shock, 4 medals overall. Your thoughts on their World Championship?
Yeah, well, it was a championship in which they were at times not that realistic with what they could expect from it. I think on the women's side, it's so dire, it doesn't even deserve to be discussed, to be honest. I think that they know themselves that it is not good and it needs to be better. And on the men's side, I think they have positives. You know, in the men junior with Van den Einde and Gilles Lejeune, I think that those are two riders that did well, looked very good in my eyes. I think in the under 23 they did better than I expected. I saw them maybe for 1 medal. But in the end, they got 2, and I think that is definitely not a bad thing. And same goes also for the men elite. I think they were, with Van Aert, it was definitely more within the possibilities to get 2 medals, but I still think that with the bronze of Nijs, it was somewhat saved, I would say, this World Championships. I don't think I can be too harsh on them. This was basically within their expectations. It wasn't the greatest, and they have to work harder to be that country again that is really in that dominant fashion, having 2-3 World Championships. I can remember that time. That was like yesterday, and now we're talking about second places and third places for Belgium, and not even in all men's categories. So yeah, it's not a great time for Belgium. And it will be interesting to see if they will bounce back, because I don't really see that currently. And we'll see. And I think it's also going to be interesting to see how that development will be on the women's side. Currently, it doesn't really look that promising. But time will tell. And, progress will not be made within a year or two. That will take more than that. And we have to give them time in that regard.
Good. That rounds up the World Championships from Lievin. The first time France hosts the World Championships in over 20 years, and despite how busted this town is and how busted Lens, the town next door, is, and all their food options here are, it was a really good event. The course was a good mix. There were a lot of spectators today. I can't believe we didn't mention that earlier, but the crowds were great, big turnout, lots of sound, a lot of good atmosphere. Didn't have any beer throwing or any real incidents, so that was a positive. Hopefully we don't need to wait 20 years for France to host it again, but next time they do it in a town which is a bit more picturesque like Besançon, I would really be in favor of that. Issam, thank you so much for all your work this weekend.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure, and it was a great World Championship. I think that it delivered. Maybe at times it was a bit straightforward, but I think that in the end it was a great watch. I think everyone enjoyed it. It was a pleasure being on, and now cyclocross is slowly but surely dying into this end of the season kind of mood, and the attention will drop a little bit, but we'll be there. We will be watching. We will be going over those races for sure.
Definitely. Before that, we'll record a midweek podcast covering the new World Cup schedule. There's racing in Maldegem, which we might cover in the same podcast if it's worth anything. And then next week we hit the races in Lille, and Oostmalle is the last one we'll cover in a few weeks. But next week is Middelkerke still. So we'll cover those races, and then indeed we start turning our attention to the road season. Issam, again, thank you so much. Everyone, thanks for listening. Catch you guys soon. Goodbye.